Hello everyone, hope you are all staying safe. It is really hard times for us all now, today, but we need to stay strong and take care of ourselves. We as humans have failed nature, and today it's the turn of nature to take back what was lost, and it is healing itself. It is time we look back at ourselves and accept our shortcomings as humans. And this is the very essence of the poem, Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda, which you have to study as a part of your syllabus. With that note of self-retrospection, here I am with you to understand the poem a little bit deeper. I would like to thank Team GYANKALYAN for giving me this opportunity to reach you all. So before going into the poem, let me tell you a little bit about the poet Pablo Neruda. Pablo Neruda was a Nobel Prize-winning poet who was once called the greatest poet of the 20th century in any language. He was born as Ricardo Alicer Neftali Reyes Basalto in the Chilean town of Beryl on 12th July 1904. His father worked for the railroad and his mother was a teacher who died shortly after his birth. He began his literary career at the very age of 13 and contributed to the daily La Manana, where he published his first articles and poems. In 1920, he contributed to the literary journal Selva Austral under the pen name Pablo Neruda, which he assumed in honor of the poet Jan Neruda of Czechoslovakia. Some of Neruda's early poems are found in his first book of poetry, that is the Book of Twilight, published in 1923. And one of his most renowned works, 20 Love Poems, was published the following year. 20 Love Poems made Neruda a celebrity, and after that he devoted completely to verse. In 1927, he began his long diplomatic career, and for your information, in the Latin American tradition, there is this tradition of honoring poets with diplomatic posts. And Pablo Neruda too began his diplomatic career, and he used to move frequently around the world. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War began, and Neruda chronicled the atrocities, including the execution of his friend Federico Garcia Lorca in his Spain in Our Hearts. For the next 10 years, Neruda would leave and return to Chile, that is his home country, several times. And he also attracted a lot of controversy too, because of his praise of Joseph Stalin, and later also for his poetry that honored Fulgencio Batista and Fidel Castro. Always Neruda was a left-leaning person, and he had joined the Communist Party of Chile in 1945. But by 1948, the Communist Party was under siege and Neruda fled the country with his family. In 1952, when the Chilean government withdrew its order to seize leftist writers and political figures, he was able to return to his country, Chile, once again. So for 21 years, Pablo Neruda continued to write a lot of poetry, and he emerged as the, you can say, one of the best poets of the 20th century. He was recognized across the world, and he was also awarded the Lenin Peace Prize, the Stalin Peace Prize, and also the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971. Neruda died just 2 years after receiving his Nobel Prize on September 23, 1973 in Santiago, Chile. In 216, the life of the renowned poet inspired the acclaimed Chilean film Neruda, which is directed by Pablo Larraín and follows a police inspector on the hunt for Neruda as he hides to escape arrest for his communist views. So before we go into the poem Keeping Quiet, which is prescribed for you, I would like to read out a few lines from two of his poems. First one is the poem Tonight I Can Write, and here are the lines. Tonight I can write the saddest lines. I loved her, and sometimes she loved me too. Tonight I can write the saddest lines, to think that I do not have her, to feel that I have lost her. Then there is this few lines from another of his poem. I'll bring you happy flowers from the mountains, bluebells, dark hazels, and rustic baskets of kisses. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. So these are the, you can say, a few lines from his poetry, and these are his most well-known love poems. But now let us come back to the poem Keeping Quiet, which is there for you in the syllabus. In this poem, Keeping Quiet, the poet aims to appeal to the readers to take some time out of their busy life for a little introspection and retrospection. The very title of the poem, Keeping Quiet, is symbolic of stopping all activities and keep the mind quiet by not doing anything, but to question and understand the purpose of the world that humans have created around themselves. The poet here advocates to keep quiet and still for a while so that we can examine ourselves, so that we can examine our own selves, so that we can question our own selves and also our relationships around us. And by doing this, we need to see how we can build a peaceful and harmonious world all over. He asks in this poem all the human beings to stop all worldly activities for a while and spend a few quiet moments in introspection. The poet has emphasized the need to introspect and bring in the spirit of brotherhood among the people. He wants people to stop talking and stop all movements symbolizing agitation and restlessness till he counts 12. That is a short period of time. So these moments of silence would be strange and exotic. So these two are the words that the poet uses, strange and exotic, because in our everyday life, everything is mundane, everything just goes on, and we are always working towards achieving our selfish goals without any regard for others' requirements and emotions. Therefore, this sudden silence would give us an opportunity to look into all these matters. Since we will not speak for a little while, the barriers between each of us would break and there would prevail a sense of brotherhood. Man would get an opportunity, we would get an opportunity to realize how we are destroying nature and how we are harming ourselves in the process. The futile wars against man and nature would be arrested and a new feeling of unity would be experienced. This is what the poet feels would happen if we keep quiet for a moment and we stop doing whatever we are doing, whatever we have been doing as humans without the least of regards for others around us. The poet wants man to learn a lesson from the art. The art appears to be inactive. It is as if the art is sleeping. But if you look into the matter deeper, you will feel the art is actually working all the time. Man too would be productive and progressive without any aggression, selfishness, and the urge for destruction, just like the art. So before we go into the details of the poem, let me read out the poem for you. Just listen to it very carefully. Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. Now we will count to 12, and we will all keep still for once on the face of the earth. Let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for a second and not move our arms so much. It would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We'd all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and a man gathering salt would not look at his hard hands. Those who prepare green wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Now I will count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go. So that is the poem Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. Now let us come to the poem stanza by stanza. The first stanza, now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for a second and not move our arms so much. Here, by asking the reader to count to 12, the poet calls for a time to be tranquil and unmoving. Here he uses the number 12 that can be associated to the 12 hours of the clock, or maybe even to the 12 months of a year. Both of these effectively depict us how our hours and months pass by before us as we continue to chase after them without so much as a pause in between. So we'll just count to 12, he asks us, and we will all keep still. We will be silent on this earth. We won't be speaking anything. We won't be talking. We won't be using any language. We will just stop for a second, and we won't be moving our arms also. Here the arms may be your hands, your limbs, or maybe the weapons that are used in the wars. So once we count to 12, at least for a moment, let us be silent. Let us just be quiet. Let us just keep quiet, and we do not move. We do not make any movement, and we would not talk also. Then come to stanza 2. It says, it would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We'd all be together in a sudden strangeness. Here again, the poet reinforces his call not to take a step further or move or even speak. He appeals everyone that we won't be speaking in any language that is symbolic of making people to now speak in one language, that is silence. And this silence would bring us all, would bring everyone together and lead us towards introspection. In this view, symbolism may also be seen in the use of the phrase move our arms so much, which in this context, if taken lightly, can be considered as merely brisk walking, but could also be signifying violence or selfish pursuits. As I have said earlier, just a little moment ago, these arms can be your hands also, your limbs, or the arms that we use as weapons in the wars. And it is to be noted how the poet mentions once and 1 second in the stanza. The appeal is set on the premise that humans are constantly speaking. We are always speaking, we are always talking, and we are always on the move. We are always moving our hands, we are always moving from here and there. So this is a kind of reinforcement. He says that whatever we have been doing, whatever movement we have been making, let us just stop for a moment. We have always moved on, we have always kept our movements, we have always talked, we have always been talking, we have always been moving around, we have always been using our hands. So let us now, at least for a second, let us come together and keep silent quiet and think. Think means let us self-introspect. Then let us come to stanza 3. It would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Here the poet introduces how such behavior of keeping quiet can make an impact. The poet then proceeds to ask the reader to ponder, consider and bask on the glory of this rare occurrence, that is, the exotic moment. Something that doesn't happen always, something that we can never think of. So it is going to be an exotic moment, a rare occasion where all the usual flurry of diverse human activities will now be all quiet and stand still and in a kind of surprising unity. As humans are perceived to be unique in their own ways and possess free will, a complete, deliberate silence of all shall create this mysterious yet wonderfully unusual unanimity. That is, we humans, we always have our own minds. We work according to our own whims. We work according to our own wishes. But if for a moment we all come together for a second of quietness and be silent, this would be a unique way to understand ourselves and the world around us. So, this would be a mysterious as well as a unique opportunity for everyone to work together at the same moment. Then stanza 4. Fisherman in the cold sea would not harm whales, and a man gathering salt would not look at his hard hands. Here, the poet provides us what leads us to this quietness. He shows us how, because of humans, now can have a little more time to think about their actions that they have been always doing, and how they would have the time to notice the details that surround their daily lives. Knowing the power they have over nature, but also being aware of where they stand, humans would now demonstrate their free will not to harm nature. He says, fisherman in the cold sea would not harm whales. So in the colder part of our world, the fishermen in the cold seas, they go out for fishing and they catch the whales. So if we come to a moment of quietness, into a moment of silence, and we would stop doing anything that we have been doing so far, the fishermen in the cold sea, they would also stop harming the whales. And the man who has always been gathering salt, he would also stop doing that, and then he would have this opportunity, the time, to look at his own hands those very hands which have been working all along without any pause. And the man who has been gathering salt, he has never realized that he has been hurting his own hands by doing that. So it would be a moment when everyone, not only just fishermen, not only just the fisherman or the man who was gathering salt, but also each of us, we will have this opportunity to look at, to observe and to understand what we have been doing all the time and how we have been hurting ourselves and how we have had never any moment to take care of ourselves or the world around us. In stanza 5, the poet says, those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. In this part, the poet refers to the wars and those who are involved in it, who are involved in those wars. So to drive this point home, he has spoken about the kind of wars. Because if we keep quiet for a moment now, if we come together for a moment of silence, then we will have a time to breathe in and out without being required to do what is usually done or blindly. We have been following orders. There will also be time for introspection. So those people who have been involved in the green wars, that is, the wars against nature, the wars against the environment, those people who were involved for the degradation of our environment, those who are involved with wars with gas, wars with fire, and maybe there were victories. There were victories for some, there were failures for some, but specifically you can say there were no survivors. If you are victorious, you have lost a lot in order to gain that victory. And by keeping quiet, humans will therefore now be able to see how in a war there are really no winners. This is where he continues to show the critical impact of allowing time for introspection, a conscious effort not to contribute or to be part of dissension. Another symbolism that can be spotted here is when the poet says, people would put on clean clothes. This is not just to emphasize how with war there is the shedding of blood, but rather the very act of putting on new clothes can be seen as taking on a different role, a different persona, and basically having a different take on the matter at hand. Then we come to the 6th stanza. It says, what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with that. The poet then diverses. He goes on to clarify that this plea for stillness, for silence, for quietness, for a moment's pause, it is not to be mistaken for the mere act of doing nothing or that. He's not talking about total inactivity where you would not be doing anything. The poet mentions to truly look at life as it is, which is of living while experiencing the beauty of quietness and the moments that go through it. Note how he used no truck with, which is an idiom, no truck with. And it has been used to mean, to connote not having association with. He says, I have no association with that. I'm not talking about that. I have nothing to do with that. The poet considers going through the hustle and bustle of life without pausing is death itself. Therefore, he reiterates once again and again throughout the poem, that this is the moment, a moment when we all will be quiet and we all will be self-introspective. Let us now see stanza 7. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. The poet then proceeds to give the reader a conditional statement to allow him to consider what would happen if humans had not been slaves to time, routine, and habit. He presents the bearing of this unforeseen single change of being quiet on the majority of the people. Then it would ultimately result to a much needed introspection. The poet further says, when he mentions death in the stanza again, as he goes on to show how humans are terrified of eventually dying. This, while not noticing that the life they are actually living is merely existing without truly being aware of what they are doing and becoming. Also, the poet asks us to learn from art, which seems to be still when seen from far away, but is bustling with life and with all the flora and fauna within. In the concluding 2 lines, now I will count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go. Having presented the dilemma, the poet effectively passes the baton to the reader. The poet now gives the ball to the court of his readers, and has now given the reader the power and the choice to be still and begin his own introspection and retrospection. As with the central idea of this poem, The call to pause and be mindful of one's own self and ways resonates to the very conclusion of the poet. So in the last two lines, you see once again, now I will count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I'll go. So now he feels he has given out everything what you need to do and what may be the outcome out of this. And after doing that, in the concluding lines, the poet tells his readers that he will count up to 12 now, and it is up to you to keep quiet for a moment while he lives. So it is up to us, it is up to humankind to pause for a moment, to opt for silence for a moment, to be quiet for a moment, and then look around ourselves, look around the world around us, and try to understand what we have been doing all the time and what nature has been doing during this time. In this moment, we need to feel what nature has been giving us. Nature has been giving us our lives. Nature has been giving us everything that we want in order to survive in this world. But what we as the human beings have been doing all this time, we have always been working tirelessly for our materialistic gains, and we have always been intolerant, and we have always been ununderstanding of the world around us. And more importantly, we have always been blind towards the harm that we have been doing to ourselves. So the time has come that we need to keep quiet for a moment, to maintain some silence and come together at the same moment and share some silence, share some quietness, so that we are able to question ourselves, so that we are able to question the very existence of our beings in this world, so that we can put questions to ourselves about what we have been doing so far in this world. Then maybe there will be some peace, maybe there will be some tolerance, maybe in the process we all will be able to build a world which is safe, peace and caring. So this is the poem, Keeping Quiet, for you. I do hope you would understand, and more importantly, this poem is very important, very relevant to the time we are living today, since 2020. This is the time we have been braving the odds, braving the onslaught of COVID, and this is the time when we had to go through lockdown, we had to go through so much of sufferings around the world. So this is the time, this is, you can say, the very most apt moment to think about this poem, to read this poem, reread this poem, and understand what Pablo Neruda was trying to say through this, through the beautiful lines here in this poem. Thank you, take care,